Hello. I would like to talk with you about the topic of music training and its potential effect on manual dexterity and coordination in children through a discussion of a study conducted at the University of Porto in Portugal entitled Orff-Based Music Training Enhances Children's Manual Dexterity and Bimanual Coordination. This study was published in 2018 in Frontiers in Psychology, which is the largest peer-reviewed research journal across the psychological sciences. The essential question examined in this study is, does collective music training enhance fine motor abilities in children? Specifically, this study looked at third grade children from low-income communities. The study compared students receiving Orff-based music instruction with students receiving training in sports, specifically basketball, and those that received no specific training as a control. In terms of previous studies, the authors underscore the need for this study by acknowledging that although music is accepted as an important tool in the study of human behavior, there is much less research available regarding the impact of music training on motor skills. As musicians, we understand that music practice involves motor skills that are somewhat specialized to the instrument being performed. There are some terms that we're going to use in referencing the measurement of motor skills. The first of these is manual dexterity. When we speak of manual dexterity, we are generally speaking of the ability to use one's hands to perform complex actions in a skillful manner. For the sake of this research study, the manual dexterity is examined in two ways: unimanual, meaning using one hand, and bimanual, meaning using both hands. In this respect, bimanual tasks are considered to be more demanding since both hands must work together even when the role of each hand differs. Of course, we see this example most readily in playing the piano. The authors cite some important studies to highlight the reasons for this research. For example, Dr. Castiglione's 2005 study titled, "Does Music Instruction Improve Fine Motor Abilities?" In this study, Dr. Castiglione found that there were some significant improvements in the fine motor skills of children who had 2 years of individual piano lessons when compared to students who had no training. Of significance as well is a 2014 study by Sarian et al., which pinpoints what is referred to as a developmental landmark that occurs approximately at the age of 8, when changes in how children process information affects motor skill output. And this led researchers to conclude that developments of motor abilities are linked to the cognitive domain. In fact, a 2013 study by Deinhardt and Manfra concluded that the ability to manipulate objects and the ability to write, motor writing ability, could predict second grade math and reading achievement of low-income children. So let's talk briefly about the methodology of this study. First of all, the study included 74 third graders from the same area of Porto, Portugal. There were 40 girls and 34 boys with a mean age of 8.3 years old. None of the students had prior experience in instrumental music or in basketball. They were selected from low-income communities. More than 50% of the families involved received social support from Portuguese social security system, and more than 70% of the parents had less than a secondary education. In terms of overall design, the participants were administered a pre-test, followed by 24 weeks of comparable instruction for the sports and music groups, a post-test, and then a follow-up test, which was conducted 4 months after the end of instruction, which coincidentally was also at the conclusion of the summer holiday. Tests were concluded using the Purdue pegboard test and the grooved pegboard test. You'll see pictured here the Purdue pegboard test, which features 25 holes aligned vertically in two rows, it is measured by the number of pegs that can be inserted within 30 seconds of time. It's performed with the dominant hand, the opposing hand, and then with both hands. The single hands are scored by the total number of pegs that are achieved in 30 seconds, and the bimanual by the number of pairs achieved in 30 seconds. This is an example of the grooved pegboard test. You'll see that it's a 5x5 matrix. The holes have different orientations, and the pegs must be rotated to fit the shape of the keyhole. It's performed with the dominant hand and the opposing hand, and the students are required to complete the first 2 rows in a timed trial. So let's talk about the results. According to the pretest results, there were no group differences prior to training with either the results of the Purdue pegboard test or the Groove pegboard test. Performance increased in all groups between the pre-test and the post-test, but the most significant improvement was in the music group. This was true regardless of whether it was a unimanual or a bimanual test results. And you can see the single line here represents the music, so you can see the significance of the outcomes. When considering the level individual scores, a significantly higher number of participants in the music group reached a high performance level in the Purdue test when compared to the sports and controls group. For the purpose of the study, a score in the 80th percentile when compared with the normative values of the test were considered to be in the highest range. 28% of participants in the music group scored at the 80th percentile or above, while these numbers were 16% in the sports group and 8% in the control group. The lowest performance level was considered at the 20th percentile or below, and no music students scored at the lowest level on any of the post-test or the follow-up Purdue test. It is important to point out that the findings regarding performance levels do not transfer to the Groove pageboard tests. The authors explain that the Groove test has a strong component of manipulative dexterity, manipulating the pegs to fit in the proper way, in other words, and the researchers keyed in on the movement of placing the peg in the hole as the one that consumes the largest amount of motor task time, and therefore is most predictive of development. The authors offer a few hypotheses as to the reason for improvement of music groups and high-level performance by the music students. One hypothesis is that the Orff-Based music practice involves eye-hand coordination and the ability to hit a target to create sound or pitch, requirement of maintaining time and movement to create rhythm, and the coordination of both hands and limbs in this process. The placement of the peg in the Purdue test corresponds to the idea of hitting a target in Orff practice, and that the results of the Purdue test are transferred most readily from Orff training into the two-hand coordination, eye-hand coordination, and motor speed that is measured on the Purdue test. A second hypothesis posed in this article is that it is not just movement-related processes in the Orff training that creates the advantage, but rather the fact that it is music training in this way is a multisensorial process. So it integrates movements, sequential movements into rhythm, pitch, and expression, and uses auditory feedback required to create precise timing and motor control. And we all know this, of course, in the sense of playing in an ensemble requiring those processes. The authors suggest that these processes may enhance the level of attention that's responsible for the differences in music students from those in the sports training or the control group. As this study did not measure the processes related to attention, the researchers suggested that this question should be addressed in further study. The authors also draw attention to the fact that the sports training group who were studying basketball improved significantly from pre-test to post-test in the same areas as the music group, but not nearly as significantly as the music participants. As basketball requires eye-hand coordination, bimanual coordination, and manual dexterity as music training does, it is possible that to achieve the same results in music, longer or more intensive training in basketball might be necessary. Again, research is needed to determine if the type of sport and the type of music being compared are critical to achieving the same results, and if there's a correlation between the length of time, the type of coordination and dexterity require, and if that could be affected based on the type of music and sport instruction. Another finding highlighted by this study is that both the Purdue and Groove tests found a significant effect of time on the improvement in the results, pre-test to post-test and post-test to follow-up. The authors speculate that the results of the study could be seen as consistent with the study by Surian et al., suggesting a peak of development of a certain fine motor skills at the age of 8, while others continue. Specifically, they point to the results of the Groove test where the improvement was not linked to specific training, especially from the post-test to the follow-up. This is another area for further research. In conclusion, this study found that Orff-based music training improves children's fine motor skills. It's important to highlight that this training was part of an organized curriculum and part of each student's regular academic activities. It is also important to note that the students were mostly from low-income communities. If this research bears out, the benefits for students, especially for students from low-income communities, should not be understated. This could encourage support and commitment to curricular music, as the cost to provide students with school-based programs can be justified by the benefits to student achievement. In closing, I found this study to be very encouraging as one considers the cognitive benefits of music instruction. The areas of further research are significant to determine exactly what elements of music instruction and practice lead to these improvements in fine motor skills. Thank you for your time and attention.